if you talk about like who is responsible, I would say like also you have to find sort of the owner of the problem. All right. So once you have talked to senior management, once you have sort of an understanding of which process you want to analyze.
Welcome to Process Pioneers, the show that takes a deep dive into the minds of decision makers, key influencers, and process experts who are pioneering the world of everything process. Welcome to the next episode of Process Pioneers. My name is Daniel Rayner. I'm the host of Process Pioneers. And in each of these episodes, I have the absolute privilege of sitting down with people from the process space in all different areas and in various capacities, specializing in many different capabilities and things like that. So always learning a lot from my guests. So if you're joining us for this episode, I'd encourage you to get out your notepad or your note-taking device. You're going to learn a lot in this episode, and I'm really excited for it. So today I've got sitting down with me is Ekaterina Sabelnikova. Now, Ekaterina is the innovation consultant at Philips. So very excited to have you on the series, Ekaterina. And we've also got Bart Hompes, who is a process mining expert, consultant, and researcher. So as you can tell, we're probably going to be focusing more so on the process mining side of things, which is quite a new innovative technology for a lot of people. I know for some people, they've been playing around with process mining for 10, 20 years, going way back. But I would say for most people and most organizations, at least, it's only been a relatively new thing. But maybe Ekaterina, we'll start with yourself. If you can talk to us a little bit about who you are, your background, how did you get started in the process mining space, and take us on a little bit of a journey leading up to what you're doing today.
Okay, thank you, Daniel. I first got familiar with process mining during my master's study in Eindhoven University of Technology. I was doing business process management track under supervision of Will van der Aalst himself. So process mining was one of the courses I took, but it was more from academic point of view. And then for 5-6 years, I didn't have anything to do with it. But a couple of years ago, Philips decided to implement it as a cross-organizational capability. And then I gladly joined the team. We found that in the professional environment, there are not that many people who even heard about this or knew about this. So it was already very helpful to have some understanding of how it works and what are the preconditions of this. And so besides academic knowledge, I also have a complementary, very hands-on experience of implementing process mining in the large organizations.
That's fantastic. And I think that's something our audience will really want to glean from you today, because I think there's a lot of people that have heard of process mining, but probably one of the most common questions I get is, have you experience in an organization adopting it and it delivering real life tangible value? We don't want we don't want another tool, another software for software's sake. We actually want something that's going to help us reach our strategic objectives. So I'm excited to continue or dive into the conversation. But Bart, maybe you can give us a bit of an intro to yourself. When did you first stumble into process mining, and take us on a bit of a journey leading up to what you're doing today?
Sure, Dan, and thanks for the invite. So my journey with process mining started similar to that of Ekaterina, where I first got into contact with it during my studies at the same university in Eindhoven. I finished my computer science degree before, and I figured, well, this is all nice, but like you said, I was thinking, well, there are so many software tools out there and so many technologies, but in the end, it's not about creating technology for technology's sake. It's about using that technology to help the world proceed and see that as big as possible, not just companies, but governments, private individuals, etc. And so I was looking for something to then continue my studies, and I wanted to be on that bridge between computer science, since I had that background, plus the applicability of it. And so I looked around and I found actually this same master's program where I first heard about process mining I got so interested then, followed all the courses similar to Ekaterina, and then also stayed around and currently still finishing the PhD in the same topic. But since starting the master's program, I've already started also doing consulting in this area. And over the last few years, I've seen a big uptake of BPM-related technologies, and specifically process mining, because businesses do recognize that, hey, we have a lot of processes, and basically the core of the business is a collection of processes, right? And so if there's a technology or methodologies that can help us improve those things, well, then that's what we want to invest in. And you see this big uptake, only exemplified by your own by your own podcast here.
That's great. That's fantastic. And I think one thing that I'm noticing, or I have noticed, is that with senior leaders, when it comes to, I guess, the decision makers within an organization, that they are being bombarded left, right, and center with many different things that are vying for their attention. That they've got fires that they need to put out. They've got software vendors knocking down their door. They've got many things that are trying to pull them in their direction. So obviously, amidst all of that noise, they're going to want to know why process mining. I've got half a dozen other things that are I should be giving my time and attention to right now. Why should I give process mining the time of day? What's it going to do for our organization? So I guess for a lot of our audience listening, one question they have is, how do you get buy-in from your senior leaders for process mining?
I'll take it. So to roll out any strategic initiative within a big company, you need support of leaders. It is paramount, and process mining is not different in this sense. But we can suggest to follow like 3 practical instruments specifically for process mining then. So one of them, I think, is very important to explain the difference of process mining versus already existing tools. That's what you, Daniel, also said earlier, that there are so many software instruments around. Like, why do I need to take one more on board? And the top management, they're usually not familiar. They never heard of process mining. We already have data analytics, business intelligence, process improvement tools. Like, why, how is it different, and why do we need extra one? Another one is we suggest to start small to demonstrate the business value quicker. I think when you do analysis of the process, it can result with lots of improvement opportunities identified. And then people get very excited and they're like, okay, let's start 10 initiatives at the same time. But the risk that you might face is that you lose your focus, and already limited resources, they're scarce, they're like spread very thinly. You're not able to demonstrate any results for a long time, and the interest of your sponsors is gradually decreasing. So actually, like, you should turn it other way around and find like one low-hanging fruit or quick wins, you name it, and start from there and show your value much sooner, and your top management will see the value continuously delivered. The time to improvements will be shorter, and you will like keep their interest going, right? And this way they will be interested and continue funding you as well. And the last one is identify a real business problem. And here the emphasis is on the word real. Process mining in most organizations, it starts bottom up. So there is a group of some enthusiasts, who heard about it, want to do proof of concept. It's very encouraging. But on the other hand, I think that it might be the case that the lack of focus on real business problems, what is on agenda of your senior management, what does keep them awake in the night. So before like just jumping on something to execute process mining for the sake of doing this, we suggest talk with people, talk with process owners, with some senior leaders, try to understand what is actually important for them at the moment, because technology doesn't matter like to which process you apply it, but so better select the one that of interest of top management. And let me shortly come back to the first one about these differences on different tools. We had intern in Philips with a specific assignment to help us position process mining and how do we explain the differences. And we found it useful to use like a graph with two axes. On one axis, we would have like personal-based and fact-based, and on y-axis, it will be data-centric, process-centric. And then you can take all your techniques on data analytics or process improvements and map it on this graph, on these 4 quadrants. As an example, if we have value stream mapping, it's a tool for analyzing processes. It's very personal-based. It's people just say how they perceive the process to be executed. It's personal-based and process-centric. But if we take BI dashboarding, it is very data-centric and fact-based. So you just extract data from the system. And if we take process mining, it will be fact-based and process-centric. So it will be all in different quadrants. And I think it's very visually understandable. Now, if you show to people, okay, look, that's what we distinguish on this criteria, on these dimensions, and and that's where all our tools are. And you can clearly see that process mining addresses a different need as well. So through these 3, I think you have a high chances to get leadership support.
That's great. That's great, because I think for some senior leaders, when you start talking process, or when you start using that word process, for a lot of them, they can think, oh, we've done the whole process thing. We did it 10 years ago. We did it 15 years ago. There is this thinking of like traditional business process management with workshops of collecting data from different stakeholders and trying to figure out what is actually the process, where are the bottlenecks, and so there can be a challenge there sometimes to I guess use terminology or use language that isn't going to shut the door or shut the gate before you even can show them actually process mining is different. This isn't your traditional process management. This is a new data-driven way of managing your processes.
Exactly. So we also do all those brown paper exercises, this huge piece of paper on the wall, trying to plot processes on it. But process mining gives a totally different perspective. I think they just maybe serve different purposes in the end.
That's great. That's awesome. And so for another question, I guess, that comes up in the conversations that I have with different people that are in large organizations trying to drive process there, is how do you go about identifying who is responsible for process performance, because obviously with all of the processes within an organization, there's got to be someone responsible for when it's working really well, to know that, hey, this is working and maybe we can duplicate this in other areas of the business. But you've also got to know who's responsible when it's not working well, to understand, well, who is governing this, who's overseeing this, who is in the best position to make changes, make improvements, or at least know who to go to ask and talk to about this process. So how do you identify who's responsible for a process?
Let me take this one, Daniel. I think you hit the nail right on his head. And I think you already mentioned a couple of characteristics of the person that you want to be talking to. Like Ekaterina mentioned before, like you want to have buy-in of senior management, but those people are usually not in a position. They don't have the time, or they have other basically parts of their job that they need to do. So they don't have time to be there leading those changes and leading the process improvement initiative, or supporting the analysts and the team with, for example, just giving them knowledge. What is the process about that we're analyzing? And what are the known pain points, right? So if you talk about like who is responsible, I would say like also you have to find sort of the owner of the problem. All right. So once you have talked to senior management, once you have sort of an understanding of which process you want to sort of analyze with process mining or improve with process mining, then you want to, of course, find that one person that, or maybe it's not one person, but multiple people is obviously also possible. That can give you, first of all, an understanding of what is this process about, right? I mean, we've all, heard about and been involved with order to cash, purchase to pay, those more or less go-to processes, especially in process mining. But companies and especially bigger multinationals, they have tens or if not hundreds of processes that could potentially prove to be suitable candidates or maybe even better candidates than those I mentioned before, right? So you want to find what is this process about, and this knowledge should be there from the get-go, not once you have analyzed. Once you have your data, you can talk to people and say, hey, what does this mean? Because without such knowledge, you might not get to the right data, right? You might not get to the actual topic at hand, or you might get too much so that you don't see the forest through the trees, right? So also these people typically they are in the sort of a position of like business process expert, business process owner, maybe global business process owners. So they already know what are the known pain points, right? What are the known issues, maybe locally in certain regions or in certain times of the year, maybe. What are the things that could be improved or could be analyzed further? So I also think that it's important to sort of think like, what if you don't have this person? Like, what are the risks that you encounter? So obviously, you don't know exactly what the process is about. You might end up with lower value analysis, right? So you spend all of this money, you have convinced your senior stakeholders, and then in the end, you don't reach the value that we talked about before. It's not about the technology; it's about the value, right? I think you also mentioned yourself, like you need to find somebody that has some authority to make changes, because you might have that person that first brought up process mining, that the enthusiast, but they might not have the authority to implement actual changes to the process. But then you end up with, okay, we found potential improvements, but nothing happens. We cannot make them actionable. And of course, lead time is an ever important KPI, right? So extended project lead times are everybody's worst enemy in implementing a new technology. So having somebody to drive that project forward indeed is vital. So if you think about finding the person responsible, I would say that first you need to find the right person, right? So like I said, they have a certain process expertise, should be able to provide process understanding and hypotheses for analysis. They should be affected by the problem, right? Or somehow already responsible for the problem. So next to being aware, they should also be affected. Usually it's some sort of a position that they get, they're responsible basically. So that they are motivated to actually implement changes. And then thirdly, they should have some authority to make changes, or like you mentioned, should be on close proximity to those people that can. That's sort of how to find the right owner, but then also you have to involve them the right way. Right? Like I mentioned before, you want to have that person involved from the get-go. Through multiple of such projects, we've noticed that you should involve them early on to keep motivation high, but also to get to that low-hanging fruit potentially as soon as possible. Starting from the pain points, like I mentioned before, but also provide sort of have them provide awareness to top management simultaneously from the get-go, so that they can be in line, let's say, with more or less the company, what's the word, sort of the mission, vision of how to improve the processes. So I think those three topics are like how to find and how to involve the person that should be responsible for these initiatives. And this can obviously be different people for different processes, and typically that's the case.
Yes, yeah, that's great. And I guess looking at, say, challenges that you may face when trying to identify a process owner, because there are many organisations out there or people that will be listening to this conversation that maybe they've tried finding process owners, but internally, but there may be a bit of resistance there because the people don't want the responsibility of copying it when it's not performing well. Do you find that as well? Is that a challenge? And if so, how do you sort of navigate that challenge? I guess you mentioned it there, like briefly, you said that you've got to give them a reason. They've got to understand why they need to take responsibility. But yeah.
That's it. It's usually, usually there is somebody that's already responsible, especially in bigger organizations, right? Which we find are the typical organizations that are interested in process mining. If you're a smaller organization, then you typically know who is responsible. But in larger enterprises, finding the person that is responsible is not as simple as finding the person, on top of the hierarchy, because they might not have enough time to spend, right? So typically those are the people you talk to, but they can assign somebody for this role. And then it can be that you might have multiple people. For example, in a global organization, you might have a person for the Americas, a person for Europe, a person for Asia, for example, right? So this is not unheard of. Trying to in my experience, it's not usually necessary to convince these people that they are responsible or that they should be involved. It's more on the same as we talked about before, that why now process mining? Because they already have been in the lean. The lean projects, any other agile improvement initiatives, etc. So it's not so much convincing them of this process needs improvement, rather why now and why process mining. And one of the topics that typically sort of makes the click is the fact that this is a continuous improvement initiative. It's not so much a singular initiative, right? It's not a whiteboard initiative or a workshop. It's a continuous improvement thing where they will be supported in their day-to-day. And that's typically what motivates them to, stay on and be involved, because it actually does help them execute what they already are doing, but now with data rather than just hypotheses.
Yes. And it makes everything very transparent. You can't hide with process mining.
That's it.
And I guess for an organization that is looking at adopting process mining, I guess one question that is always thrown around is where do you begin? I mean, you were mentioning before, Bart, about your common processes like order to cash and procure to pay, but maybe not always necessarily the most beneficial or the best ones to start with to get those quick wins and to prove the value to senior leaders. So I guess for the audience that's listening now, that they'll be coming from a wide range of organizations. Where do you start with when it comes to process mining? Are you looking at a complete end-to-end process, or are you pulling a sort of a smaller component of a larger process out, or where should you start looking when it comes to process mining?
This one will be on me. So when you analyze different process mining methodologies, especially in the academic literature, they all start with this planning phase, when you already selected the process and you know which one it will be, and you start plan how to extract data, how to do analysis. But the step prior to this is missing. Exactly, like how do you decide what you're going to work on? It could be that order to cash, yes, it's kind of like the most obvious, purchase to pay, the most obvious candidates there. But there are a number of bottlenecks that can be. You say we do order to cash, but do you have people available right now? That could be also say, okay, we start with this, but process owners are busy. They have their own plans for the coming quarter or half of the year, right? It's not that you can come to people and say, we need like your time now, 3 days per week. Everyone is already like planted up front. So you need to consider all these different dimensions when you analyze which process to start. And for us, we developed like a sort of framework to do this from 2 phases. Consists of 2 phases. In phase 1, we do initial screening. It's based on 3 questions. And in phase 2, there is already a short list that we analyze in more into detail, score and prioritize for our execution. So in phase 1, 3 main questions that we ask, do we know already known issues? Are there issues and pain points identified? Second question, is process mining feasible at all? Is it the right tool and technically possible? And the third one, what we can say about the savings? Can we estimate it upfront? So about known issues, so it already can give us some understanding of the impact we can make on this. On the technical feasibility is, as we discussed, is process mining the right tool to answer a question at all? Maybe you should go to dashboarding or RPA or lean methodology or any other technique would be the right one. And you don't need process mining to do that. And also technically, so we know that there should be a log file, there should be unique ID, it should be highly repeatable processes, timestamps. So all these are preconditions to do that. So that's we also try to, if it's not in place, then it even doesn't make sense to continue with this. And the last one on expected savings. So we look at the number of amount of manual labor involved and any other savings opportunities. So in the end, it's also a very critical criteria how much you can save money with that. And from this, we have a short list of pros. So some of them, they're automatically rejected and others, they proceed to phase 2. And then we already have a short list of processes, and now we need to make a more detailed assessment. And for this, we use scoring models. So all those business people can be familiar with scorecards and these types of instruments. Then the scoring model is a set of dimensions, a set of criteria that you use to evaluate each of your candidate projects against. And before this return on investment or how much money we could save, like purely financial metrics, were the only one criteria. You know, like, oh, we can make a lot of money with this, we go for it, which is proved not to be the right way. You really need to look at it from multiple dimensions. So the typical ones is a strategic fit. You already mentioned it before. Is it really where we want to go and what interests us? Then you have some risks, what risks involved in doing this? Do we have availability of expertise? That's what I said before, right? With this order to cash example, if you have high return on investment, but people are not available, you can say we go for it. But again, no one will devote time and it will take forever to do that. Capabilities to execute, do we have, is it easy to extract data from a system or like things like this? So you need every company can decide themselves which criteria exactly are important for them, but important to remember that it should be over a comprehensive view on your project. So we score projects, and then in the end, it gives like a very clear picture on what is strong points, what are weak points, and in the end, you kind of make trade-offs. What is important for us now, what we go for. It results in this roadmap for us, what we're going to do next, what's coming afterwards. And we found it like super helpful. So people know what they're going to work on. You can start your pre-alignments up front. You can say people, hey, we want like a half of year to work on this. And there's like, oh, okay, then we will take it into account for our planning and resource allocation, right? So they also know that we're going to start also from point of view of the team. You can also express your interest, like, oh, I want to work on lead to opportunity on Salesforce. And then people can be also distributed according to their interests. So I think this methodology is indeed more applicable for large organizations. So it's already like when you do it at scale, when you have a lot of processes, a lot of stakeholders involved. But for large organizations, I think that's a really step up in maturity of doing process mining.
Yeah, that's great. I think that resources, that's huge. I think that the number of organizations that have adopted a process mining tool only to not have anyone own the tool, and then it kind of just sits there. No one actually uses it. It doesn't deliver any value to the company because they haven't put the necessary resources to own that tool set and to run with it. And also data. I think data's one that often comes up, at least in the conversations I'm having, that they either don't have the data, or it's very messy data, or they're not sure of the quality of the data, or any of those things. So I think those probably are the two ones for me that like when you're talking then, the number of people that I've spoken to where those two things have just come up many times.
I would like to connect your first point with leadership support. So about this resourcing and people don't have time to do it. That's, I think, also another responsibility of the senior management to translate it top down, that process mining is now the tool for our continuous improvement, and we do it at the company level. And if it has to be a KPI of some person, then let it be, make it a KPI, and then people feel kind of more obliged, to embark on this journey with you. Indeed, on the operational level, when you do like a daily management of your processes, then people are very busy. They're over the top with their daily work, and just one more, and you feel a push. You feel this resistance from their side. They're like, oh, I want my burden on our head. Why do we need to do it? So it really has to become more into pull mode. That they ask us for help, and we support them in this.
Yeah, that's great. That's really good. And obviously, when diving into process mining, you mentioned, Ekaterina, a number of things that need to be in place there, like resources and data. But I guess when it comes to, there are many different use cases for process mining, whether that's rapid process discovery or process analysis, monitoring risk and compliance, all these different areas. Would you say they all require the same foundation to effectively adopt and implement this capability? Does it change, or are there sort of common pillars that need to be put in place to make sure that value is delivered to the organization?
I'd like to take this one. So in what you've mentioned just now, I think you again touch upon a critical point where it's about the foundation, right? So you might have one-off sort of proof of concept, proof of value initiatives where you might even outsource the whole thing to either a software vendor or a consulting agency, right? But to have a sort of sustainable process improvement initiatives that use process mining, what we typically see larger organizations do is build like what they call centers of excellence, right? Where it's like a sort of a local, capability center, basically, where you have the people that have the knowledge of the technology. You might have people that know about the data and how it is stored and how it is sort of maintained as well. You have sort of people that have access to the different systems that support these processes. Ekaterina mentioned Salesforce, all these different SAP, so ERP systems, CRM systems, all sorts of supporting systems. Of course, you need access to those and probably some knowledge about those as well. But then also the people sort of that have, tools to do the process mining with, or the process improvement with. And so if to build such a center of excellence, I think is something completely different compared to doing these one-off projects. So just like you would have a roadmap of which processes to analyze and to take on, you would also have sort of a maturity roadmap of such a center of excellence. But obviously, you're not going to be fully, mature and in your capabilities of implementing process mining from the get-go. You sort of evolve as you go, right? So again, I like to think like, why do you need this, right? So first of all, I always typically say, well, you need some sort of way of working, right? You cannot just take every process differently, especially if you want to have some sort of a plan, if you want to have some sort of deadlines and some points where you, like Ekaterina mentioned, if there's going to be KPIs for people, they want to know what to do and when to do it. You need sort of centralized access to data. You don't want this to be scattered around in the organization, and that goes for data, but also to information, right? You just build that knowledge, and you want to keep it central. Also, you want to be able to scale the program. You cannot really do that if it's just scattered all around, right? We hear one of the things that sort of makes people lose trust in process mining is typically the fact that it is not organized well. It's not that they don't trust the technology or that they don't believe that there is value to be had using such a technology. Rather, it's that it's not applied well enough, right? There is nobody responsible, or there's no support, or there's no structured way of working, basically for process mining. So talking about sort of these pillars that you need to have in place, way of working, obviously, I mentioned a couple of times now, where you have sort of a life cycle that each project should go through or typically goes through, maybe some templates and documentation to support that, but basically it's about this way of working. Access, obviously, I mentioned a few times already, access to data, access to the right people, and access to the source systems. One very important thing is, especially in larger organizations, that there is already, you don't start from scratch. There is already a landscape of not just initiatives for process improvement, but also in IT. So there are many software systems, right? There might already be systems to support initiatives, and there might already be even a sort of also a center of excellence for process improvement, and that you might want to or need to work together with as a new analysis team, let's say. Or maybe even the process mining capability becomes part of that team that is already in place, right? So, and then obviously governance is the most important one, in my opinion, where you talk about data access, right? A lot of data goes into these initiatives, so you need to really organize this access properly. Privacy regulations are big, especially with, for example, GDPR. Nowadays it's very important that you also don't share too much information. Process mining, we talked about it, is basically giving you the transparency into your process. But obviously, you might not be able to give that same transparency to all users, especially if you're going to sort of do let's say, a democratization of process mining, where people working in the processes, they themselves have access to dashboards and visuals and analysis capabilities. They might be able to see, things that they are not normally able to see in their day-to-day access to the supporting systems, right? So there's always this governance aspect that you need to keep, and that also supports the trust in the program. So if you think about it, it's like, most handyman, they have sort of a toolbox, and process mining is just a tool. And so the things we talk about it's not necessarily that different for process mining compared to other technologies, right? It's, building capability, having top management support. All of these things are sort of, you see them often, I would say. They also apply to if you want to implement BI or if you want to implement anything else. But it's like, it needs to integrate, like any tool needs to fit in the toolbox, and you don't need 3 of the same. Every process mining should fit into the organization, and that's why you need to sort of factor in the organizational maturity of process mining and build an action plan, right? So like I said, you have a roadmap. First of all, you prove your value. And obviously, you don't want to build build a house without the foundations first. You say, well, this is what we're going to do. You prove that it can be valuable to your organization, maybe with a smaller process, not the biggest, order to cash of your organization's biggest seller, right? That's probably not the best way to go. Then once you generate traction, like Ekaterina mentioned, at some point the initiative goes from a push to sort of a pull state, where people are hearing about it. Maybe you've analyzed a few processes by now, you've improved them, people are hearing about them, and also these people that we talked about before, these global process owners, they might hear like, hey, there's this new initiative that might, that has already proven itself with other processes. Then they might come to you and say, hey, look, we have this process, we might, we believe it might be beneficial to also implement this, but they need to have visibility of where to go. And it's not this person that I've heard of, it's the center, right? So once you do that, you can then scale up, and then in the end, what you end up with is that process mining, or any initiative for that matter, becomes sort of widely adopted, and you have trust, you have capability in-house, and yeah, that's sort of the way to go to build this foundation, in my opinion.
And in the future, do you see process mining being adopted by every organisation, maybe over a 500-person headcount, or do you see elements of process mining making their way into the different solutions and systems that we're pulling the data from? Like, what do you think the future of process mining looks like?
So regardless of the actual implementation of the technology, right? Because indeed you see it as standalone tools, but also implemented in these supporting systems that I mentioned before. But do I see process mining sort of being present in all organizations? So yes, clearly, yes, I do. And I think Will van der Aalst has a good quote on this. Process mining is like process hygiene. Like, we don't need to tell you to wash your hands. I mean, maybe now we do with this whole COVID situation. But process mining is like process hygiene for companies. And the ones that don't will end up with processes that are ineffective, performing less, and ultimately will the competition will overtake them if their processes are maintained better. So that's my view, at least.
That's great. And Ekaterina, the future of process mining from you, what does that look like? And what sort of trends are you noticing? Where do you think we're heading in this space?
I think a lot of tools already indeed embedded process mining, maybe for easier access and easier this barrier to start using it, like Power BI, all those data analytics tools. They have their plugins, but also tested it, and I think you can start with this easily. So you don't need to hire a consultants firm, and it all becomes already like a big program. If you want just to test it, you can upload there your CSV file and try. I think it's really great, really low barrier for adoption. And regarding this process hygiene, I think that we heard a lot like, don't you think we didn't improve our processes before process mining? Like everyone was sitting and waiting for process mining to come. No. So people work on continuous improvements on their own process owners, right? They continuously improve it, but maybe that's enough for 70%. But those remaining 20 or 30%, you really want, it's just difficult to identify, even to depict it or look across all globe. Like when we analyze countries, it could be 50, 60 markets that you have. You cannot go to each of them separately. So on this final improvement points and then maintaining this good state, that's very important, I think, to indeed embark on the process mining journey. Another thing, maybe that all regulations also they change continuously, and you cannot say, "Oh, now my process is like 100% good, and it's going to stay this way," right? So there are always some new checks implement, or financial regulations. 4 eyes principles, etc., fraud detection, and you need to add it also to your process mining model. So over time.
That's great. That's fantastic. Well, Ekaterina and Bart, I just want to thank you both for sitting down and having this conversation today. I've been taking a ton of notes and learning a lot from you both, and I'm sure that the audience, our audience, has been gleaning a lot from this conversation as well. In fact, I think that we can only fit so much into a 45-minute conversation. I'm sure that the audience has more questions. So I guess moving forward, where does the audience go to learn more about process mining? Are they able to get in touch with you? Do you have the headspace and the capacity to answer more questions post-interview? Or if not, where should the audience go to learn more?
I'm available on LinkedIn. There are also a couple of more detailed articles on the topics that we touched today. But I'm super passionate about this topic, so happy to engage. Always feel free to drop a message.
Same for me. LinkedIn, I think, is the best platform to connect. And talking about process mining specifically, there's processmining.org, a website that has recently been revamped that holds lots of pointers to both academic publications, courses, data, software, etc., and then obviously an introduction about the technology itself. So I would start there.
Amazing. Well, thank you both so much for sitting down and having this conversation with me today.
Thank you, Daniel.
Very well. Thanks.